morning, metalheads of the internet. Welcome to a new episode of the Metal Meltdown, and today we're looking at the latest studio album from Oranssi Pazuzu entitled Mestarin Kynsi, or perhaps Mestarin Kynsi. I got no goddamn clue. Hell, I don't even think I got the name of the band right for this one. Hard to tell. This is the 6th studio album from this Finnish metal band that over the course of the last decade has been playing around with a particularly unique and provocative fusion of styles and sounds, pulling from all these different shades of black metal, traditional black metal, Finnish black metal, melodic black metal, pulling from psychedelic rock, space rock, old school prog rock, modern progressive metal, pulling as well from dark ambient, post-metal, I'd even argue a little bit of dungeon synth music. A sound that harkens to a bizarre and mind-melting concoction of bands like Mastodon, Enslaved, Burzum, Mortius, and many, many more. And hell, I'm not even sure that description does this band a lot of justice, if we can even attach a description to Oranssi Pazuzu for that matter, or at least a description that doesn't immediately equate to this band is goddamn weird and trippy. This is a band that truthfully I've had a lot of trouble getting into over the years. I definitely appreciate the artistic vision of Oranssi Pazuzu. They definitely have a sound unlike anything else really out there. There really isn't any other band that comes close to this toxic psychedelic fusion that they have concocted. But often I have found that their albums are too weird and too big for their own damn good, sometimes crippled by the weight of their ambition. At their best, Oranssi Pazuzu have the ability to immerse you in a psychedelic sonic world unlike anything you've heard before, but at their worst, they can come across as being pretentious and eventually irritating. However, despite my objections and experiences, Oranssi Pazuzu are the talk of the town right now. People are saying almost consistently across the board that this is their strongest record, their most refined record, their most immersive record. Another YouTuber of mine, the Metal Triss, even went as far as to say, and I quote directly, "A sonic representation of our nightmares. Oranssi Pazuzu have created an album of the year contender that demands your attention." And I want to start off by saying that, for the most part, I agree with a lot of these statements and arguments. This is probably the most I've enjoyed and been immersed in an Oranssi Pazuzu record. I do think it is very well refined, very well structured, very well produced consistently across the board, and even in its most jarring moments still feels quite open and accessible, at least by the standards of Oranssi Pazuzu. Musically speaking, there are very few, if any, drastic changes to the band's formula and approach, as it seems this time around they were far more concerned and dedicated to creating something more refined, fluid, sharpened. That focus and refinement has in turn made this album feel much more immediate. It's actually quite easy to find yourself immersed into this album's musical atmosphere. Granted, it's still not always the smoothest ride, but it does overall run smoother than previous albums, at least for me. And even when it isn't smooth, it's still fascinating and invigorating. Take, for instance, opening track Il Mestis and its almost cinematic approach to introducing barrages of eerie synth and industrial passages. It's very slowly and meticulously plodding away like some kind of film score waiting for the title character to appear on screen. And it's hardly a triumphant moment when that title character shows up, as the track only grows to be noisier, louder, sludgier, and more abrasive. As an audience, it's kind of like we're waiting for Batman to show up, we're waiting for the blaring horns, the swelling strings, but instead we get a 7-foot-tall demonic slime monster. And the following two tracks, which, heads up, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce, I think I've fucked up enough already for one video, play out as if we are now seeing the carnage, the chaos, the devastation left in the wake of that demonic slime creature. They're loud, they're violent, they're incredibly frantic. There are howled vocals and weird, angular, almost mathcore guitar patterns scattered everywhere. The third track in particular expands on the cinematic nature by literally pulling from cinema. with odd and ambient barrages of keyboard strings and vocal chants that sound like the long-lost mutant freak child of Jordan Peele and Tim Burton. And while the slime creature finally calms down a little bit after this, the album itself does not, with the fourth track suddenly borrowing from some of the most demented and psychedelic classic prog rock and fusing it with some incredibly harsh and abrasive icy black metal. While the fifth track plays out like some kind of schizophrenic collaboration between Mortius and Perturbator. But perhaps what's most impressive about all this is that as extreme as these experiments get throughout the duration of the album, Oranssi Pazuzu never quite fully lose focus, and as such, never quite fully lose you. But that's not to say that they can't lose you at least a little bit. I'd be lying if I said that throughout this album there were moments that were just inherently, objectively so jarring and shocking that they did pull me out of the experience. They did pull me out of the moment. The fifth track in particular was a very difficult number for me to sit through because it is probably the most mentally taxing thing on the record, and it comes after a barrage of incredibly mentally taxing immersive tracks. And honestly, I just flat out didn't like the vocals on this at all. They're not really helping to communicate anything on the record musically, and also quite literally, as I have no clue what anyone is saying at any point. And this has nothing to do with the finished lyrics and everything to do that I simply cannot understand a single fucking syllable. And the harsh nasally tone leaves a lot to be desired as well. All the vocals on this thing sound like some kind of diseased goblin with a speech impediment. You could actually strip this record of vocals entirely, make it a purely instrumental metal album, and I would have no concerns whatsoever. I actually think it would be a lot more effective, cathartic, and powerful without the vocals constantly distracting me, constantly getting in the way. Yes, this is probably the band's strongest record to date, I would say, but there are still so many things about Oranssi Pazuzu's sound that are so objectively, inherently, inarguably fucking weird and off-putting that it still is inherently, objectively, inarguably, at times difficult for me to really sink my teeth into this thing, for me to really get lost into this album's universe and world. I'm going to give this album a highly enthusiastic, but an extremely cautious 3.5 out of 5. I do not recommend listening to this album in any casual setting or capacity, nor do I recommend using any psychedelics while listening to this psychedelic black metal record unless you are already intimately familiar with everything about this album. Instead, what I would recommend is that you would treat this film the same way we might treat a high art indie horror film. Don't treat it the way that we might treat Halloween or Friday the 13th. Treat it the way we would treat Rosemary's Baby or Mother. Really sit down and analyze this thing. Really sit down and immerse yourself in its world and accept that even in its best moments, it's still pretty fucked up. I want to make it clear, I totally understand why people are loving this the way they are. I get it 100%, but unfortunately, there are too many of these small, almost unavoidable issues for me to really go higher than a 3.5 out of 5. Now, purely hypothetically, if this was an instrumental album, as I had referenced before, I would feel comfortable giving this a 4 out of 5. And again, I would honestly recommend Oranssi Pazuzu go that route, because at this point, the vocals are the weakest thing about this band and this record for me. But for now, again, a 3.5 out of 5. A highly enthusiastic one. I encourage you to check this out, but an extremely cautious one nonetheless. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm a non-expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.